Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5 Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about the 500-year pivotal moments of Christian history and salvation history, and what does that mean about 2000 AD? Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen. Gloria Patri, Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper et seculi seculorum. Amen. Sorry if the wind is causing problems here. I have to find time throughout the day to do these videos. It's not always optimal. So, if you look at salvation history, it seems like something pivotal always happens every 500 years. And this can go back to, let's say, Genesis. We know that the patriarchs were roughly an estimate around 2000 BC, around that time, the time of Abraham, God's revelation to Abraham. And then you look, and we know this kind of based on archaeological evidence and based on writings by the Egyptians, that they had Israelite slaves around 1500 BC. And then Moses came along, and then you have the period of wandering in the desert, of course, and the judges and all that. And then you can kind of look and see that the time of David and Solomon was about 1000 BC. And we know this because there's actual history of this. We have archaeological evidence of this, the Bronze Age period. And then with Solomon, after Solomon, you had the breakup of the kingdom, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, and the division of Israel and Judah. And then you saw both kingdoms kind of coexisting, albeit with a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of the prophet books come from this period of time. Till about 600 BC, 500 BC, first you see Israel, the northern kingdom, being taken by the Assyrians. And then about 586 BC, you see the lower kingdom, the southern kingdom, being taken by the Babylonians. And so you see that's a very fundamental period. That's the destruction of the first temple. And then you go to Babylon, and that's the period of, let's say, Daniel, the book of Daniel. Then they're in captivity for quite some time. And then eventually, you see this played out in the book of Nehemiah and Ezra, they are allowed to return because the Persians conquer the Babylonians, and they're allowed to return back to what we would call the Holy Land and rebuild the temple. And then you have that period of Second Temple Judaism, where we have the books of the Maccabees, for example. So they come back, the Israelites come back, and then you have this time of Alexander the Great. He conquers that area in the 300 BCs, and then you see the Hellenistic infiltration, which is talked about quite a bit in Maccabees. The Maccabee family is trying to fight back this foreign intrusion. It's this pagan religion, which you saw played out in Judges, which you see played out all the time in the Old Testament. The Israelites taking on foreign gods, foreign wives, and so forth. And then you see, of course, around what we would call now 1 AD, the birth of Christ. We have a video on the creation of the calendar, was created by the Catholics. And of course, that's a formative period. And then if you go another 500 years, so you have 1000 BC is the creation of the Davidic kingdom. 500 BC is essentially the destruction of those kingdoms and sent to exile. 500 years later, you have 1 AD, the birth of Christ. Then you have Christianity spreading. And then 500 AD is probably the least milestone-esque of these, in that you saw the legalization of Christianity by Constantine around 313 AD. And then you saw it becoming the official religion in 380 AD. I guess you could say 500 AD would be the time where the barbarians are being evangelized. You look at Clovis taking Catholicism to the Franks and becoming a Catholic monarch about 587, 570 AD. And so you see the Vandals later doing it. So I guess that's what you could say about 500 AD, is that Christianity is certainly cemented in Europe, and you see that the barbarians are being converted. Then you jump to another 500 years, and you have a gigantic, monumental period of Christian history with the Great Schism, which is 1054. Now that is a milestone date because that's the date where each side excommunicated themselves. We have a video on why traditional Catholics shouldn't be Orthodox, and we kind of talk about the history of Orthodoxy there. But no doubt that that's a very formative period and break. And then the next 500 years, you see Christendom flourishing in Western Europe at the time of the scholastics like Thomas Aquinas in the 1200 AD. But you see 500 years after the schism, you have the Protestant Revolution, which of course is exceedingly monumental. And that led to Protestantism and denominationalism, which we now have thousands of denominations. And so now you go 500 years from now, or from then, and now you have 2000 AD. So what is the 2000 AD milestone? Now some would say it's the apostasy. I posted a poll when Benedict, rest in peace, passed away, whether or not you saw him as a valid pope. And again, it was a small sample size on the voting, but 90% of you guys said he was valid. So we only have a few sedevacanus. But what is it? If you look at Hair, the musical that was done in the 1960s, it's the dawning of the age of Aquarius, right? The age of Pisces is the time of Jesus. So they were heralding, and this was, of course, a vanguard of the New Age movement, which really gained a lot of traction in the second half of the 20th century. And it's kind of been sublimated. I wouldn't say it's gone away completely. It's definitely still around, but it's just not as strong, or maybe it's just not as open as it was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They saw it that it's going to be the post-Christian time. So maybe that's the monumental lapse that we're seeing now in 2000 AD that we're not going to be able to see, or I'm not going to see it, or maybe my ancestors in a few hundred years, that we're entering the age of Aquarius. We're entering the age that is not going to be dictated by Christianity. And we see that already being played out, unfortunately, in my humble opinion, that much of Europe is been fallen to atheism and postmodernism. We have an episode I recorded when I was in Florence, why Europe is essentially mission territory again. So I think that, if I had to guess, would be the milestone, is now we are entering a post-Christian, if not anti-Christian period. And so it's just interesting. So you notice every 500 years, there's some big monumental episode occurring. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.